Quito, Quito, Ecuador. What an amazing city. I recently spent a week in Quito, and that trip taught me a few things. And the most important thing I learned, or found out, is that Quito can't be my favorite city. It honestly can't be any foreigner's favorite city. What? Unless you understand the very important talking points that I have in this video. We're gonna look at my trip from beginning to end, and we are gonna skim over the boring stuff, of course. Specifically, we're gonna look at how I got to Quito, why I was in Quito, what I did in Quito, what I ate in Quito, where I stayed in Quito, how I got around Quito, my trip back to Manta and Portoviejo, and some final personal thoughts, including how much I spent in Quito that will help tie everything together. So starting with the trip from Manta to Quito, I gotta say, it was incredible. Especially if you compare it to other forms of city-to-city transportation. It was fast, it was fresh, and it was comfortable. I do have one complaint, but that might have actually been my fault, and we'll talk about that later on. And I will be talking about my whole flight experience in a separate video, so make sure you stay tuned for that. Now, why exactly was I in Quito? Normally, I wouldn't take any prolonged trip or visit to another city because it just doesn't work out economically. Especially when the trip is to a city that's as far and expensive as Quito is. But on this occasion, I was there because someone hired me for work. Due to confidentiality, I won't exactly disclose what I did, but I will say that what I did was more or less the job of a translator or interpreter, which is a service that I offer here in Ecuador. And that job was only supposed to last for one day. So basically the plan was to go the first day to do my job, then I was gonna stay another day in order to record, which is why some of you may have seen a live stream that I did on this channel in Quito. And then on the third and final day, I was scheduled to come back to Portoviejo. But things didn't exactly go according to plan because I somehow ended up missing my flight.
You blew it.
The reason for this was because with my cousin, with whom I spent the time in Quito, we had thought that we did the check-in the night before. But apparently something went wrong and the check-in didn't get completed. So the day of the flight, I ended up missing my flight because we arrived just like a minute or two too late. So yeah, it was a major pain, but I do blame myself for not doing due diligence and making sure that I checked before my flight to make sure that everything was done correctly. I got overconfident.
Your overconfidence is your weakness.
So due to that, I had to find a way to get back to Manta and Portoviejo, and with my cousin, we talked it over and we decided that bus travel was not a good idea with the rainy season that was going on and the landslides that came with it. So we decided to get another flight for Sunday. And I'll give you more details as to how much that cost me later on in this video. So now that I had all this extra time, what exactly did I do in Quito? Well, I definitely did a lot more than if I would have just spent the one extra day after my job here. But I definitely feel like I did much less than someone who was coming for touristic purposes would have done. So the first thing that I did when I arrived to Quito was visit my aunt and uncle because my uncle was the one who picked me up. Then after that, of course, I went to go do my job sometime in the afternoon of the same day. Then, after we finished with our work, we went out to eat to this place that had a wonderful site. I don't exactly remember the name, but I remember I did post it on Instagram, so I'll post a picture somewhere around here. Then, my cousin picked me up and we went to go hang out and grab a bite to eat. And since I was staying with her, after we finished eating, we went back to her place. I'll go into more details about how my experience was with her a little bit later on. But then continuing with what I had planned to do on my day off, the first thing I did, which I had promised my Swiss friends that I would do if I had the chance to visit it when I got to Quito, was go straight to the Swiss embassy. Let it be on the record that I do plan on visiting Switzerland because it sounds like an amazing country. Then after that, I walked around a little bit and went to the park La Carolina. This is where I did my live stream. In it, I gave some first impressions about Quito when I was there, so if you want to check it out, I'll leave a link in the description. Then after that, I went to the Key Centro, which was very close to the park, and I got bored there very fast because while it was fun to walk around and see a whole variety of stores, it felt kind of bad that I didn't have enough money to buy anything, so I quickly prompted to just leave. Then I went out and got an Uber because that's what my cousin recommended for me to get around while she was at work. But unfortunately, I didn't know how to use Uber, so I ended up asking someone who was around the Quicentro, and they also didn't know how to use Uber. So when their friend arrived, which was not too long after, they helped us out. Then after that, I just stayed in my cousin's place. And of course, the plan was to go back to Manta and Portoviejo the next day, but that didn't happen because of what happened with the flight, with me missing it. So then the next day, I just ended up staying most of the day in my cousin's place. And actually, after missing my flight, some of the days were very similar, where I just stayed in my cousin's apartment, and then at night, we would go out and do something. With the exception being on Saturday, when I went out to record my interview video in the Centro Histórico of Quito, where I literally interviewed foreigners and asked them what recommendations they had for people planning to visit Ecuador. If you haven't seen that video, I'll leave the link in the description. And then after that, we spent the rest of the afternoon with the rest of our family. Then on the final day, we visited our family again, and we even went to the cemetery where my aunt, which is my cousin's mother, is buried. Rest in peace, aunt, and I dedicate this moment of silence to you. Okay. Then we went to the part of the city where there's this volcanic crater where people are actually living in that crater. It's pretty crazy, but it's actually very beautiful. And I did make a short of my time there. But yeah, after all of that, later in the afternoon, my cousin took me to the airport, and after a delay, which we'll talk about later, I went back to Manta and then I went home. So those are the things that I did in Quito. But what did I eat in Quito? I ate a lot of things, to be honest. I actually had the chance to try yapingachos, and I even recorded my first reaction to eating those because I had never eaten them before. I had sushi with my cousin, which was really yummy in Quito. I ate chicken wings, which actually looked like chicken wings because the ones I've eaten in Portoviejo are tiny as heck. And the best part was that that was actually the place of a friend of my cousin's. So even though the restaurant was about to close, she kept it open a little bit longer so that me and my cousin could go and grab a bite to eat. I also ate ramen, and finally I got to eat actual ramen and not just cup ramen. What I will say is that encebollado to me is still better than ramen, but maybe that's just because I'm trying ramen in Ecuador and not officially in Japan. So I'll wait till I go to Japan in order to give my final verdict on ramen. And I also ate Cinnabons because yes, Quito does have Cinnabon stores, not just cinnamon rolls. And I wasn't planning on scarfing down 4 Cinnabons, but since I missed my flight and I was planning on taking those Cinnabons back to share with my family and friends, I ended up just eating them before they expired. I can't complain, they were good. But my fitness side sure did suffer. I also ate some meat, some fries, some bread, some things that I prepared at my cousin's place. I also had the chance to eat some nachos with my cousin one night, and they were pretty good. And on my final day in Quito, I had the chance to eat hornado de chancho, which yes, was incredibly tasty. And I even had a second go at yapingachos, which were much better than the first ones I had tried the first day I was here. And overall, the food was great. So of course, during all the time that I spent in Quito, I had to have a place to sleep. And I'm really thankful with my cousin for letting me stay at her place. And just between you and me, I actually fell in love with my cousin's place. For those of you who thought that I was gonna say that I fell in love with my cousin, well, I'm watching you. And who am I kidding? It wasn't just between you and me. I told my cousin that her place was amazing. Out of respect for my cousin's privacy, I won't tell you exactly where it's located, but I will say that it has an amazing kitchen, an awesome living room. It has 3 rooms, 2 bathrooms, and she even has a Roomba. To me, that's a big deal because I've never seen a Roomba, ever. So now let's talk about how I got around. And even though, like I mentioned earlier, I didn't go out as much as probably someone else would, I did still go out. So also, like I mentioned earlier, I did use Uber once, and the experience was nice. The driver was kind, and he got me from point A to point B very easily. And the day that I arrived to Quito, I went with my uncle in his taxi because he is a taxi driver. But the rest of the time when I was in Quito, I was always with my cousin in her car. And I'm glad that we were in a car because there were some places that were raining and some places where it was just unbearably sunny. The weather really is random in Quito. But the driving experience can be a bit slow because Quito, being a big city as it is, also has big traffic. But they do have a little workaround for this, and it might be something you don't know. But basically, Quito has this system where, depending on your license plate number, there are certain days where your car can go out and certain days where it can't go out. And of course, this applies to all vehicles in Quito. So this helps a bit with the congestion of the streets, but being there, I can confirm that it doesn't completely solve the problem. There are still a large quantity of cars, and be prepared to wait a long time to get from one place to another when there's a lot of traffic. And then we have the end of the trip, which was my trip back to Manta and back to Portoviejo. Like I said before, the day I was originally supposed to go, I missed my flight. Unfortunate, but I will blame myself for the most part for that. Even though I still blame the app and Avianca. Curse you, Avianca. But anyways, this time to avoid problems, we went to the airport early. We didn't have to do check-in apparently because LATAM apparently does that for you. One thing that was really bad though was the fact that since I went so early, I had to wait a long time for my flight to take off. And what made this situation worse was the fact that my flight got delayed. So of course, one day I missed my flight, and of course, the other day, my flight would be delayed. The good thing was that I didn't have to wait until the next day, but an extra hour of waiting added to the already 2 hours that I had waiting at the airport was quite painful. But luckily, nothing went wrong with the flight. I got back to Manta, my best friend went to pick me up and took me back to Portoviejo, and then everything was good. So overall, my trip to Quito was fantastic. Even looking at it from a cost perspective, it wasn't that bad for me. And that is taking into consideration the fact that I had to get another flight because I missed my first flight. But let's take a look at my expenses overall. My flight to Quito and back was $143. It cost me $2 to take a taxi from my house to the bus station that took me to Manta. Then it cost me $1.25 for the bus from Portoviejo to Manta. After I arrived to Manta, I had already planned to go visit Don Shader, which is why you might have seen that I was part of his first live stream, and he also gave me some microphones in order to be able to do interviews. So first to Don Shader, I appreciate you, brother. And the cost of the taxi from the bus station to Don's place was $3.50. So when we were done with the live stream and hanging out, I had to go to my friend's place because I had already planned to stay with my friend in order to not miss my flight to Quito. And a shout out to my friend Andres for having a meal and letting me stay at his place. It really helped me out a ton, so I appreciate it. But the taxi from Don's place to my friend Andres' place cost me $2.50. Then the next morning at around 4:30 or 5, which was the day of the flight, we called a taxi and the taxi took me to the airport. And that cost $6. I don't feel it was far enough for a taxi to normally charge you $6, but since it was early and since it was to the airport, I'm guessing that's why they charged a little bit more. Then when I arrived to Quito, my uncle picked me up and he took me to my aunt and uncle's place. And then he also took me to the place where I had to do my job. All of that together cost me $28. And I will tell you now, taxis do normally charge you about $20 from the airport to the city. So what my uncle charged me was not exaggerated. Then one day when I was in Quito, I bought this box of Pacari chocolates, which was about $20. And I also bought my cousin a bar of chocolate, which was another $1, $2. So in total on these chocolates, I spent $22. Then there's the Uber cost, which cost me $3 from La Carolina to my cousin's place. Also, let's not forget the Cinnabons that I had to scarf down, which cost me $12. And of course, I bought another box of Cinnabons, which was another $12. And my brother asked for a box of mini buns, which was $11. So in total, just on Cinnabon stuff, that was $35. The night that we went out to eat ramen, that ramen cost $10. The night that we went out to eat nachos, I spent $20. Even though the bill came out a little bit more, but my cousin put in the rest. And let's not forget the heaviest and most unwanted expense, which was the flight change, which cost me $60. It would have cost more if I would have tried to get it the same day, but that's why we waited until Sunday in order to get the flight. And lastly, there's the expense of my friend taking me from Manta to Portoviejo, which is about $10. And I say about because he hasn't charged me yet, but he's gonna charge me soon, and the approximate price for a taxi from Manta to Portoviejo or Portoviejo to Manta is around $10 to $15. So all of this leads up to a total of $346.25 for my week spent in Quito. But now that we have the expenses and we know everything I did in Quito, let's go back to what I said at the beginning of the video. My trip to Quito was fantastic. And as you could see with the expenses, my trip to Quito was actually relatively cheap. And they become even cheaper when you realize that I didn't even have to pay for my trip there and my trip back. Nor did I have to pay for my rescheduled flight. What? The person who hired me paid for my trip there and back, and my cousin paid for my rescheduled flight. So in total, my trip was just non-realistically cheap, coming in at under $200 for that whole almost a week. But that's not even 100% why Quito can't be my favorite city, even though one would think with how cheap it was that it would be my favorite city. But no, it can't be because it's not realistic. For me, and possibly many others, we have to get a true feel for the place we're going to before we can actually determine that it is our favorite. And in my opinion, the short Wonderland-style reality that you live in a city is definitely not enough for you to be able to consider it your favorite if you are planning to spend a prolonged period of time there. Yeah, for sure, maybe for short-term travelers or if you're just spending a short amount of time in the city, then everything's gonna leave you in awe and you're gonna think it's amazing. And in that moment, you might even consider it to be your favorite. But when you stay long enough, then you end up running into the reality. Cost of living can be quite expensive, much more so than the few bucks that you're spending on a hotel or a hostel from just staying there for a week or so. Traffic can definitely be unbearable, especially when you have to get from one place to another really quickly. And of course, you won't feel that if you're just on a trip here to explore and have fun, because you're not thinking about it. But once you're here and you're here to stay, you're gonna realize that it is quite annoying. The noise pollution can be quite the pain. And once again, you might not even notice it if you're just here to have fun. Oh, but spend long enough here and you're gonna notice that the noise, not cool. Then there's crime, which is to a point where people aren't just scared, they're absolutely frightened. I talk about it enough with the situation that happens in the city that I live in, but after listening to my family and watching the news about what's happening in Quito, it's equally, if not worse, over there. And you wouldn't really even notice it if you're just there for a week. And unless you get lucky and you find locals who know the language that you know, how do you plan on communicating? You could of course isolate yourself, but as a friend of the channel recently told me, what's the point of coming to a foreign country if you're not gonna interact with the society or the community that lives there? I'm not saying you can't, but why would you? Maybe because it's cheap, maybe because you just like the climate. Who knows? It's really your reasons, but I think being able to interact with others is very important. And it just might be a problem for you once you stay here long enough. So what I'm trying to say with all of this is that before you mark Quito or any city as your favorite city, make sure you spend enough time in it in order to see not just the superficial outside, but also the true inside that people who in that city live through every single day. And this is especially important if you're planning on living here in Ecuador. Because if you're not, then this might not seem like such a big deal to you. And that's fine, because you're here just to enjoy the moment that you're here. And there's no problem with that. Quito is an amazing city, so just have fun there, regardless of whether you're just visiting or if you're planning on living there. And definitely check out this video next in order to know what things to bring in order to be prepared for your trip. As a bonus, right now we're at the Museum of Portoviejo. This is Lisa's exhibit, and you should definitely check it out if you're ever in Portoviejo.